Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, brought to you by Nickel Investigations, the podcast that delves deep into the unsolved mysteries that haunt our province. I'm Jay Nickel, a private investigator with Nickel Investigations, and your host and guide in this journey through the chilling tales that left investigators baffled and communities in search of answers. In each episode, we'll unearth the forgotten stories of Ontario's cold cases, exploring the details, the evidence, and the individuals involved with the eye of a private investigator who specializes in cold case investigations. From the mysterious disappearances to the perplexing murders, our mission is to shine a light in these cases and hopefully bring justice to those who have long awaited closure. But we can't do it alone. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of these enigmatic cases. We'll speak with experts, law enforcement officials, and sometimes even the families of the victims, all in the pursuit of truth. So buckle up and prepare to dive headfirst into the world of unresolved mysteries. Together we'll keep the flame of hope burning for justice, one episode at a time. Thank you for tuning in to the Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast. Let's begin our quest for answers. Hello, I'm Jay Nickel from Nickel Investigations. Happy New Year and welcome to our next episode of Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, Season 1, Episode 14, The Murder of Kelly Mombourquette. The new body of 14-year-old Kelly Mombourquette was found on Monday, October 19th, 1987, in the parking lot of a business on Yorkland Blvd in the northeast corner of Toronto. The troubled girl who had run away October 3rd from a group home in Warrendale Court had been bludgeoned and her throat slit. A drug user and sometime prostitute, Kelly had lived on the street or with friends since running away from the group home. Since there was little blood at the scene where the body was found, police concluded she'd been murdered elsewhere and dumped at the site on Yorkland Blvd. Police received hundreds of tips in the case, and on October 29th they arrested and charged 3 men in connection with Mombourquette's murder. But at the suspect's preliminary hearing in January 1988, a judge threw out the charges, citing the flimsiness of the evidence, including the unreliability of a 16-year-old witness. The investigation. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. Kelly Ann Mombourquette went missing from a Rexdale group home on Warrendale Court in Etobicoke on October 3rd, 1987. On Monday, October 29, 1987, Kelly Mombourquette's new body was discovered in the parking lot of 300 Yorkland Blvd in the Don Valley Parkway, Shepherd Avenue East area of Toronto by a woman on her way to work. The 4'10", 82-pound girl died from a knife wound to the neck and had been severely beaten about the head, and her throat had been slit almost from ear to ear. Cause of death was an incise wound to her throat that measured 11 centimeters wide by 5 centimeters deep. Kelly also sustained other cuts and bruises on her face and head and another knife-like wound to her upper lip area. At the time, police said that Kelly spent time in the downtown and Regent Park areas. Due to there being an absence of blood at the scene on Yorkland Blvd, police also said it was likely she'd be murdered somewhere else, with her body later being disposed of at this scene. The area is easily accessible from nearby expressways such as Highways 401 and the Don Valley Parkway, besides other major arterial roads. Kelly being sentenced to time at the group home instead of jail after a recent brush with the law, but a runaway after 2 days. Several of Kelly's friends and acquaintances spoken to by the press said she began to get into drugs when she was only 11, becoming addicted to cocaine and crack and prostituting herself to feed her addictions. While police cautiously described Kelly as streetwise, her friends in the housing project pointed a picture of a scared runaway child who was heavily into cocaine and even crack. Several friends and acquaintances who all requested anonymity said she had started taking drugs about 3 years prior to her death and fell in with the wrong crowd. They said she grew bored with school, dropped out and turned to drugs and later prostitution, getting in trouble with the law and drifting aimlessly, occasionally sleeping in doorways or underground parking lots. It's so sad, one friend said, because I knew her before she got into all that and she was real nice and real bright in school. Well, Kelly went missing from the group home weeks before she was found murdered. Friends interviewed by the press claimed to have been with Kelly the Sunday night before she was found murdered in the basement of a Belshaw Place apartment building. Reportedly, she told friends that they had to leave because she had to meet a man about something. She apparently told her friends that if she didn't have the money the man wanted, he might beat her and her friends, which is why she requested that they leave. One friend said, "I think she was really afraid of the man." She then showed her friends about $20 she said she was going to give to the man, hoping that would be enough for the drugs. Another friend reported that Kelly had to meet a man on Old Mill Road in Etobicoke on Sunday night about purchasing drugs. This was at approximately 9:30 p.m. on Sunday night, and that was the last time her friend said she saw Kelly. At the time, police were looking to talk to anyone from the nearby Ramada Inn and in any cleaners who may be working in the buildings in the area around the time the body was found. Police officers carrying Kelly's picture spent days talking to residents in the homes and apartment buildings in Regent Park. Everywhere in Regent Park, people were talking about the brutal slaying. From the owner of the Belshaw Place grocery store where Kelly bought the occasional pack of cigarettes to her former schoolmates. They all wanted to know if police were closing in on the killer. "Anyone who would do that to a little girl, a baby, doesn't deserve to live," said a mother of four who didn't want her name used. A man testified that he talked to Kelly Mombourquette in the evening she was killed, provided a markedly different version of the events in a statement he gave to police earlier. A preliminary hearing was told after arrests were made. In the statement, Will Henry Gardelman told Metrotron police that he did not speak to the 14-year-old runaway in the evening of October 18th, the last time she was seen alive. Mr. Gardelman testified that he lied to police in that statement because he was nervous about becoming involved in a murder investigation. Mr. Gardelman told police he was sitting at home in his Regent Park apartment on River Street that evening when he looked through his apartment door peephole and saw Kelly Ann sitting at the end of the hallway. The only conversation he had with the girl occurred 1 week earlier in the same hallway when he came across her smoking crack, a highly potent form of cocaine, from a Pepsi can, he told police. She asked him if he wanted to split some with her, he said. Mr. Gardelman also told police the girl was buying the drugs from one of his neighbors on the floor, Carlos Ramon Zambrano, one of three men who would be accused of killing her. His statement contrasts with evidence he gave at the hearing earlier. When he testified in the evening of October 18th, he talked to Kelly Ann after he noticed her using drugs in the apartment hallway. After he turned down her offer to share some cocaine, Mr. Gardelman told the hearing he walked her down the hall in the direction of Mr. Zambrano's apartment, which led to the suspects. Up next, the suspects. The suspects: Carlos Zambrano, Sharma Marajh, and Subash Raggoo. 11 days after Kelly's body was found, three men were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Carlos Zambrano, 32, of River Street; Sharma Marajh, 39, of no fixed address; and Subash Raggoo, 24, of River Street. Police contended that Kelly was murdered in Zambrano's Regent Park apartment on River Street before her body was dumped. A man, identified only as John in court documents, testified he had many discussions with Zambrano while being kept in segregation and jail together because both were sick. He said he had many discussions with Zambrano, but he said it was not until several weeks later when he read newspaper accounts of the murder hearing that the significance of Zambrano's remarks became clear to him. After that, John said he started playing detective and tried to pump Zambrano for more information about the killing. John told the hearing during one of the conversations, Zambrano told him that he had stayed at home and they had taken the body. He said Zambrano said something about the murder containing loose ends and something wasn't done right. He said he later surmised through media coverage of the hearing that the loose end Zambrano was referring to was Patricia, a Crown witness identified only by her first name who testified that she witnessed Kelly's murder. John testified that Zambrano told him that the three accused men would be walking from the charges and that Patricia's life wouldn't be worth 2 cents. Under cross-examination by Zambrano's lawyer, Walter Fox, John said Zambrano also told him that he'd been framed and that he did not do it. John agreed that not once did Zambrano tell him how the murder had been committed. Crown's case was bolstered further by testimony from Sharon Castor, a 20-year-old single mother who also lived in Regent Park. She said she was familiar with the three accused and in the past had used cocaine in Mr. Zambrano's apartment. She said she knew Kelly Ann and seen her in Mr. Zambrano's apartment on at least 2 occasions before the killing. Ms. Castor reluctantly told the court that she was in Mr. Zambrano's messy apartment. 2 days after Kellyanne's body was found. She said there was plenty of clothing strewn around, but she was certain that among the clutter she saw a pair of pants that belonged to Kellyanne. I believe they were Kelly's pants because I'd seen her in them. She said she also saw a small black purse similar to the one described by Mr. Gartleman and believed it also belonged to Kellyanne. Crown Attorney Mary Hall told the hearing that since he testified, Mr. Gartleman has been threatened and intimidated. She said the matter relates to a family member, one of the accused, who was in court when Mr. Gartleman testified. Judge Kerr found out the name of the man who had been bothering Mr. Gartleman and ordered that he not be allowed in court. Police also said they have evidence that a threat may be made to the witness, 16-year-old Patricia. Crown's case relied heavily on the testimony of 16-year-old Patricia, who admitted to being a habitual liar, a cocaine addict, and an alcoholic. She testified in the evening of October 18. She went to the River Street apartment of Mr. Zambrano, who was there with the other two accused and Kelly Mombourquette. The girl, who was under police protection, told the court that she was in Zambrano's Regent Park apartment with the three accused men when she saw Marajh, assisted by Zambrano, slit Kelly's throat after they caught her trying to steal some cocaine. He said they all got high and Miss Mombourquette, who was quite weak because she had not eaten or slept recently, eventually blacked out. She said during the evening Miss Mombourquette suffered 2 seizures brought on by her use of cocaine and that someone had to pound her chest to help her regain consciousness. After the second seizure, Patricia said the 3 men took Miss Mombourquette and put her on the floor and they each had sex with her one by one. She told the court that during one night the previous week she had been forced to have sex with at least 6 men in Mr. Zambrano's apartment. She said it was retribution for stealing drugs from Mr. Zambrano. After Miss Mombourquette was attacked, Patricia said everyone fell asleep. She said when Miss Mombourquette woke up, she went through the pockets of Mr. Zambrano's pants and found a quantity of cocaine and about $700 in cash. She said Miss Mombourquette was about to leave the apartment when she was stopped by Mr. Zambrano. She said she and Miss Mombourquette were stripped and their clothes searched and that when the drugs and cash were discovered, the 3 men got mad. They started yelling, beating her up. She said Miss Mombourquette, her face battered and bleeding, was running around the table trying to elude her attackers. She then collapsed on the couch. Patricia told the court that Sham, Mr. Marajh's nickname, then left the apartment and returned after a short time. Sham walked over to the couch, picked her up by the hair, held her up off the ground, and explained to her what happened to people who ripped them off, Patricia said. He told her, "You deserve this," over and over. It sounded like a lecture. She said that when Mr. Zambrano held her, Mr. Marajh cut Miss Mombourquette's throat with a straight razor, all the while Zambrano was holding towels around her shoulders to soak up the blood. After that, she said, the body was put into a large canvas-like bag, taken outside to a car and placed in the trunk. She said the car was driven for about 25 to 30 minutes and the body was dumped in a garbage can. All 4 of them participated in disposing of the body, she said. In earlier statements to police, Patricia said that it was she who actually carried out the murder. She later told police she said this because her life had been threatened. Patricia said her confessions were part of an elaborate lie she fabricated after receiving death threats from Kenneth Pert, a man she called Dillinger. He threatened me, said you better get my buddies off, she testified. He suggested I tell police I did it. Patricia admitted on several occasions she altered her story of the murder. In one statement, she said she was forced to cut the throat of Miss Mombourquette by Mr. Marajh. She later said that she was in the shower when the murder was committed. Diane Franz, a welfare worker from Cornwall, Ontario, testified she had talked to Patricia in her office on October 21, 1987, 2 days after Kelly's body was discovered. Patricia had testified that she hitchhiked to Cornwall after the murder. Franz said Patricia appeared distraught and said that she wanted to obtain enough money to travel by bus to Calgary, where her uncle lived, and that she was from Toronto and lost all her identification. Patricia then recounted a story about being at a party and witnessing a murder. Franz testified. Patricia told of how she saw blood everywhere in the stairwell and in the apartment. Now this is an important detail to lawyers defending the accused men. They stressed throughout the hearing that police had not discovered any forensic evidence, including traces of Kelly's blood, to prove that she was ever in the Regent Park apartment. The suspects will continue. One sec. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. The suspect continued. In fact, said defense lawyer Jeffrey Kurtzner, the blood found in Mr. Zambrano's apartment was that of Angela Missick, who was wounded by a shot in the head at the same location on October 13th. Patricia was also present in that shooting, said Mr. Kurtzner, who represents Mr. Raggoo, a trial man who was charged, but more information needs to be found on that. Franz also told the hearing that at one point during the interview, when Patricia realized she was not going to get any money, she pulled a knife with a blade, about 10 centimeters long, from her purse. Patricia said not to worry, she knew how to handle herself on the streets, and then slid the knife in behind a pair of suspenders she was wearing, Miss Franz said. The hearing knife was submitted as evidence, an ordinary-looking kitchen steak knife with about a 5-inch blade. The hearing was told the knife belonged to a 16-year-old who the court ordered could be identified only as Patricia. Patricia told the hearing that she carried the knife to defend herself when she traveled. Shortly after Kelly was killed, Patricia moved to Calgary for a brief period to live with her uncle. Constable Dan Dorsey of the Calgary Police Service testified that the uncle was a good friend of his, and on November 15th, during a visit to the man's ranch, he had a conversation with Patricia in which he confessed to the Toronto murder. 2 days later, he said the uncle gave him the knife that Patricia said she carried to defend herself. The knife was found in a dresser drawer at the ranch. Constable Dorsey said that when Patricia confessed, he called Toronto and spoke to Sergeant Mike Hovey of the Homicide Squad. He said Sergeant Hovey greeted Patricia's confession with skepticism. Along with another investigator, Sergeant John Line, Hovey traveled to Calgary on November 19th, where they interviewed Patricia. He said they then flew back to Toronto without having seen the knife. All three were discharged of a preliminary hearing in provincial court. In stating the reasons for discharge in an oral decision that lasted about 1.5 hours, Judge Kerr said the testimony of the Crown's key witness, a 16-year-old who could only be identified only as Patricia, was flimsy at best. He noted that Patricia had provided police with 3 different versions of the crime, including one scenario in which she admitted killing Kellyanne. He said there were too many inconsistencies in her story for him to commit the case to a jury trial before the Supreme Court of Ontario. On the basis of all evidence called at the hearing, there are certain aspects of Patricia's evidence that an only suspect would have been proven wrong, Judge Kerr said. Judge Kerr noted that experts did not find one piece of forensic evidence to support Patricia's testimony that Kellyanne was slain in Mr. Zambrano's apartment. A pathologist said that he found it unusual that forensic experts were unable to turn up any evidence to support the police contention that Kelly Mombourquette's throat had been slashed in a Regent Park apartment. I find it difficult to believe that the forensic experts would find no trace of blood in the apartment, Dr. Frederick Jaffe testified at a preliminary hearing. Dr. Jaffe said he had heard of comparable injuries where forensic investigators were detected traces of blood on the ceiling. Hearing was told that the wound at Kelly's neck severed the carotid artery, the major supplier of blood to the brain. He said when a person is cut like that, blood usually spurts from the wound. If the wound was packed with towels, it would prevent the spurting of blood, Dr. Jaffe said. However, he said he found it very unlikely that some of the blood would not have been left behind in the apartment. From the outset of the hearing, Judge Kerr indicated strongly his reservations with the Crown case and the investigative procedures of the police. It became clear as the preliminary hearing unfolded that police had gathered little hard evidence against the 3 men in the 85 days between the finding of Kelly's body and the first day of the hearing on January 11th. Forensic evidence showed there was no trace of blood, fibers, hair, or fingerprints of Kelly in Zambrano's apartment. Besides Patricia, Crown witnesses included a former cocaine user who told 2 contradictory stories and a pair of admitted car thieves, one who was in jail and dying of AIDS. There was little else to the Crown case. The police investigators were simply mistaken. They got caught by a person, Patricia, who was a very good liar, said one of the defense attorneys. Among the flaws in the investigation was the seeming reluctance by homicide investigators to check out every clue. Defense lawyers were concerned the investigators ignored a kitchen steak knife that they said could mean the weapon to kill Kelly. The knife was taken from Patricia by police in Calgary, where she fled after Kelly was slain. The defense maintained throughout the hearing that Patricia was the killer. The serrated knife was eventually ruled out as being the murder weapon, but it was proved only after the defense lawyers had brought it to Toronto to be analyzed at the Forensic Science Centre. Pathologist Dr. Hans Sepp said Kelly's throat had been slashed twice by a weapon with a serrated edge, but not by the knife seized in Calgary. In March 1989, Marajh was sentenced to 2 years in prison for possession of cocaine for the purpose of trafficking and simple possession. During a search of Marajh's River Street apartment in July 1987, police found a book containing a list of gambling debts owed to Marajh that the judge concluded also contained references to money owed for cocaine purchases. The family. This information stems from an investigation into prostitution activities in the Jarvis-Dundas area of Toronto, which is carried out by the Metropolitan Toronto Police during the summer and fall of 1987. In particular, the police focused on the conduct of the appellants who operated a prostitution ring called The Family. The police believe that the appellants used the family to procure, control, and live off the avails of a number of prostitutes in the area. The activities of the appellants generally took place around the Pioneer Donut Shop at the corner of Jarvis and Dundas Streets. A number of prostitutes controlled by the family slept at the Signature Inn in Mississauga after work in the Jarvis-Dundas area. Additionally, a number of meetings were alleged to have been held at the Signature Inn and the Relax Inn, 2 hotels in Mississauga separated only by a parking lot, during which rules relating to the prostitution activities of the family were discussed. According to some people familiar with the donut shop and the family, Kelly was known to be connected with them, and they may not have been too happy with her. Up next, my theory. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. My theory. While the location of the police theory that Kelly was murdered in the apartment of Zambrano is completely wrong with zero blood evidence, could the 3 men, Carlos Zambrano, Sharma Marajh, and Subash Raggoo, have killed her elsewhere and the location was never found? That does seem plausible. Whose car was alleged to be used to move Kelly's body? Surely police would have gone through anything the men owned or had access to. Yet there doesn't seem to be any information evidence in the hearing. Was Kelly killed far closer to where she was found and there wasn't a good enough forensic review of the parking lot area? Possible again. There was the name of George brought up at the hearing, who defense lawyers claimed was Kelly's pimp. He may also be known by the name Junior. He certainly hung out at Pioneer Donuts. Some people familiar with George or Junior believe he was involved in the murder, plus the murder of Amber Potts, another prostitute known to frequent the donut shop. I believe the police were on to the correct people whom they charged, who I also believe were connected to the family. But I feel the police got the murder area wrong, or there was a lot of forensic mistakes made, perhaps after the shooting in the apartment of another girl, just a few weeks prior to the murder of Kelly. Was there a forensic problem where police in the Crown did not want to confuse the prior shooting case evidence with this murder of Kelly? Was the shooting case a far stronger evidential one, and they didn't want a defense attorney questioning if the forensics from that could possibly be mistaken for the murder of Kelly? The dates of each murder should suggest otherwise, but could a smart defense attorney question some kind of contamination or crossover evidence? I believe so. One thing that is almost certain, Kelly was killed over drugs, though. The Young Offenders Act. Politicians from the 3 major parties condemned Metro Toronto Police for claiming that the Federal Young Offenders Act hampered their search for a 14-year-old runaway, Kelly Mombourquette, who was found murdered. The government said it will not change the law. In fact, the Federal Justice Department said the police had erred in interpreting the law. But Metro Police insists that releasing the name of Kelly Mombourquette to aid in her search would have violated the law. The force also warned that unless the laws change, the situation could be repeated. And 2 weeks before she was murdered late last Sunday or early Monday, Kelly lived in stairwells and roamed the streets near her parents' home in downtown Toronto's Regent Park housing development for low-income families. Police said they did not enlist the help of neighbors and friends in the search for Kelly because the Young Offenders Act makes it illegal to reveal the identity of any young offender. Liberal MP Robert Kaplan, who introduced the Young Offenders Act when he was Solicitor General in 1984, said in an interview that police have an attitude problem. My reaction is to strongly condemn police for their unrelenting opposition to this act. They made every effort to make a good law not work, he said. The Regent Park Residents Association said that one phone call from police notifying them that Kellyanne was on the run might have saved her life. Everett Van Olst, a spokesman for Federal Justice Minister Ramon Nachin, said in an interview that the police have misinterpreted the law. He said the Young Offenders Act was amended in November 1986, allowing people to release information necessary to an investigation. The suggestion that they could not contact neighbors and friends is wrong. They have erred, and I mean that in a legal, not a political sense. He said that there is no intention to amend this section. But Inspector John Dennis, head of the Metro Toronto Police Youth Bureau, said politicians were attacking their investigation for political gain. He said that even with the amendment, information only can be released if young offenders pose a danger to the community. They want us to break the law. If they want to give us more freedom to identify young offenders, they should change the act, Inspector Dennis said. Priscilla Platt, an assistant Crown attorney who's written a book about the Young Offenders Act, said the situation is not black and white. I can sympathize with police because their rights are limited, but the extent of the restrictions is open to interpretation, she said. These things are fairly new and the courts have not given adequate direction. Ms. Platt said the law will always have its critics because it's trying to balance the privacy of young offenders against the interests of the community. Claire Westcott, chairman of the Metro Toronto Police Commission, said, "We had to follow the letter of the law very strictly, and that's what was done." He said politicians aren't close enough to understand the law and how it applies on the streets. We deal with thousands of runaways and young offenders every year, and the law doesn't work. Brian Wiegand, legal counsel at the Justice for Children Legal Clinic, expressed surprise at the police reaction. Thought the police had abandoned their bellyaching about this. They seem to be using this case to take a free shot at the Young Offenders Act, a law that has never been given a fair shot in Ontario. Mr. Wiegand said police could have circulated her name and picture freely without ever implying she was a young offender. New Democrat MPP Richard Johnson said the police interpretation was narrow and called Ontario's Attorney General to clarify the law. If the police are right, and I don't believe they are, we should change the law. If they aren't, the government should be moving to make sure the police understand the law, Mr. Johnson said. Up next, Remembering a Little Girl. Remembering a Little Girl. About 10 people crowded in the Mombourquette home in Regent Park, a small row house with bowling and hockey trophies lined the front laced curtain window. On the day a provincial court judge discharged 3 men in the murder of Kelly Mombourquette, a letter from the 14-year-old runaway was delivered to the doorstep of a relative. Family and friends believe that Kelly must have written the letter sometime in early October after she ran off from an Etobicoke group home. She'd been sentenced in youth court to stay there after she was found guilty of shoplifting. At that time, a Canadian Union of Postal Workers was in a labour dispute with Canada Post Corps, slowing mail delivery to a trickle. It is believed that Kelly's letters were caught in the backlog, thus delaying their delivery until after her death. Anne Darling, Kellyanne's godmother, who testified at the hearing, said the letter sent to Darlene Mombourquette indicated Kelly's strong desire to return to her Regent Park home. Every 2 hours in Toronto alone, an anguished parent, relative, or friend picks up a phone to call police and report a missing child or a runaway teenager. Some youngsters are found by police and returned home. Others avoid detection and join Toronto's burgeoning community of street kids, usually estimated between 10,000 and 20,000. And some, like 14-year-old Kellyanne Mombourquette, sandy-haired teenager who disappeared from a Rexdale group home, aren't found until it's too late, far too late. Thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts to listen to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, as we continue in 2024 with Season 2.